Tunde didn't just leave his wife. He staged her humiliation like a performance, right there on a bright Lekki street where glass-front mansions glittered behind him like witnesses that wouldn't speak. Zainab sat on the pavement with an 8-month belly heavy with twins, her dress torn, her skin slick with sweat, her eyes wide like someone trying to understand how love can turn into laughter. A battered suitcase leaned against her thigh. Baby clothes lay scattered beside tiny shoes and a feeding bottle, the kind of soft items that should have been waiting in a nursery, not on dirty concrete like evidence of a life being erased. Behind her, Tunde stood near a sleek black car, smiling too hard, holding a thick stack of cash like a prize. His mistress, Safina, clung to his arm in a tight red dress, laughing like she had just won something she didn't even build. Neighbors slowed down. Passers-by stared. Phones lifted. Everyone wanted a front-row seat to the moment a pregnant woman became a warning. But here's what nobody on that street knew. 3 days earlier, a Lagos law firm had placed a sealed envelope in Zainab's hands. Inside it was a truth so heavy it could change every breath she took. She had just inherited $18 billion. And she had kept it quiet because she wanted to see who her husband would be when he thought she had nothing left. Then the second truth hit even harder. Before he threw her out, Tunde had emptied the twins' college fund. Every naira she had saved, every sacrifice she made, gone in one transfer to his personal account. So while he laughed, Zainab pressed record. And while he thought she was finished, she was already building the kind of evidence that can't be argued with. Before we go deeper, hit like if you believe no woman deserves this kind of betrayal. And subscribe now, because the twist in this story is the kind that makes people pause mid-breath. And tell me in the comments, if you saw a pregnant woman being humiliated like this on your street, would you speak up, or would you walk away? Zainab would later remember the heat before she remembered the pain, because the sun that afternoon didn't behave like a normal Lagos sun that simply shines and moves on. It sat high and hard over Lekki like it had decided to witness everything, pouring light onto the street with the kind of clarity that exposes lies the way harsh lighting exposes makeup. The air itself felt sharp. Even the breeze carried no comfort, only the dry smell of hot asphalt and exhaust and the faint sweetness of palm trees that looked too calm for what was happening beneath them. Somewhere far down the road, a generator hummed behind a gate, steady and indifferent, while the world in front of Zainab collapsed with the same indifference. She sat on the pavement with her back against a low curb, not because she wanted to sit, but because the weight of 8 months of pregnancy had turned her body into something that demanded patience. Her belly was huge, round, stretched, and heavy with twins, the kind of belly that makes strangers offer seats in buses and women at markets touch your stomach and pray for safe delivery. Now that same belly made her feel like a target. Her left hand rested on it automatically, protective, as if her palm could shield her children from humiliation. Her right hand was on the handle of a battered suitcase that had once meant travel and optimism and fresh starts. Now it meant exile. The suitcase looked like it had been dragged through more than just a hallway. Its corners were scuffed, its zipper strained, and dust clung to the fabric like it had been thrown out in a hurry. Beside it, on the ground, baby items lay scattered in a careless spread. Tiny shoes, a feeding bottle, folded newborn clothes that had been clean in the morning but now touched pavement, and a small baby blanket half open like someone had ripped the future and left it undone. Those things didn't belong on concrete. They belonged in a nursery. They belonged in a hospital bag. They belonged in a life where a man didn't abandon his pregnant wife like garbage. Zainab's face was damp, not just from tears but from sweat, because when humiliation comes in public, it doesn't wait for you to process it privately. It hits your skin first. It makes your throat dry. It makes your pulse loud in your ears. Her cheeks were streaked, her lips parted slightly as if she'd been trying to speak and had realized words were useless. Her eyes kept lifting toward the houses and cars and people, searching for something: pity, help, justice, maybe even the smallest sign that this wasn't real. Across from her stood Tunde, not pacing, not confused, not troubled. He stood relaxed, comfortable, planted the way a man stands when he believes the ground is his. The black car behind him reflected sunlight like polished arrogance. Its hood gleamed. Its windows were dark. Its presence on that street looked like a statement, a reminder that money could buy speed, silence, and power. Tunde leaned near it like the car was his throne, laughing loudly enough for people to hear, loud enough to turn heads, loud enough to make sure Zainab understood that even her pain could be used as entertainment. He held a thick stack of cash in one hand. He didn't hide it. He didn't tuck it away. He displayed it. He moved it slightly as he laughed, fanning it as if it was proof of something. Proof that he was fine. Proof that he had options. Proof that he could replace her. He acted like the money was the main character, and Zainab was a side plot. And the cruelest part was that it looked practiced, like he had imagined this moment, rehearsed it, waited for the perfect afternoon light to do what it was doing now. Expose her, frame her, reduce her. Safina stood close to him, pressed into his arm with the familiarity of someone who believed she had already crossed the finish line. Her red dress clung to her body, bright and attention-grabbing, a deliberate contrast to Zainab's torn, dusty clothing. She smiled broadly, not the kind of smile people give when they're nervous, but the kind people give when they're proud of what they've taken. She tilted her head slightly, as if she was posing for the phones that were already raised in the distance. She looked like someone who didn't just want to win. She wanted witnesses. And there were witnesses. Neighbors who should have been minding their own business lingered at gates and balconies. A woman pretending to arrange flowers by her fence kept looking up. Two young men slowed down on a bike and hovered just long enough to stare. A man walking past with a bag of groceries glanced at Zainab and then looked away quickly, like her pain could stain him. A group of people near a junction raised their phones in that casual, hungry way people do when drama is free and humanity feels optional. Zainab could feel eyes on her skin. It wasn't just being seen. It was being watched like an event. There are some humiliations that happen behind closed doors, where you can at least cry into a pillow and tell yourself it doesn't define you. This one happened under open sky, on an open street, with an audience that didn't know her but felt entitled to her breakdown. Zainab felt it in the air, the unspoken judgment, the silent questions that people always ask women first. What did she do? Why couldn't she keep her home? Was she too demanding? Was she unlucky? Was she the type who thought pregnancy would keep a man? The world always wants a reason to blame a woman because blaming her makes cruelty feel justified. Zainab's mind tried to replay the morning like she could find the exact second where everything turned. She remembered waking up and feeling the twins shift inside her, a familiar flutter that always made her whisper a small prayer. She remembered trying to stand carefully, moving slower than normal because her hips had been aching. She remembered thinking about the baby clothes she had washed the night before, the ones now on the ground. She remembered the smell of food she had struggled to keep down lately, how nausea came in waves and she still tried to smile through it. She remembered looking at Tunde's face earlier in the day and noticing something cold in his eyes, something she didn't want to interpret. Then she remembered the shouting, the sudden speed of it. The way men who have made up their minds don't argue to understand. They argue to end. She remembered how quickly her things were moved, how quickly her room became not hers, how quickly her marriage became over, with no respect for the twins kicking inside her like reminders that this wasn't just a breakup. This was abandonment. What broke Zainab wasn't just the act of being thrown out. It was the way it was done. Deliberately. Loudly. With performance. With laughter. As if she deserved it. As if the life she carried was an inconvenience. As if her body was not sacred. She looked down at the baby items again, and something inside her tightened. Those tiny shoes had been bought with careful money and careful hope. That bottle had been picked after reading reviews late at night, imagining feeding time, imagining sleep-deprived smiles. That blanket had been folded and refolded the way women do when they are preparing for something beautiful. Now those things lay in dust like they were mocking her. Like her hope had been thrown out too. A cramp rolled through her lower belly, sharp and sudden, and for a second fear cut through everything else. She pressed her palm harder against her stomach and held her breath until the sensation eased. It wasn't labor, she told herself. It couldn't be. Not here. Not like this. Not while cameras were pointed. Not while her husband stood laughing like a man who had just escaped responsibility. She forced herself to breathe slowly, because panic would make her body betray her before her husband ever did. Her phone was in her hand, and she stared at it with blurred vision, not sure what she was looking for. A rescue? A call? A miracle? She had missed calls from her mother earlier that she hadn't returned. She had messages from church women. She had unread notifications that felt distant now, like they belonged to a different life. And then her screen lit again with a notification that didn't feel distant at all. It was from the same Lagos law firm that had delivered the envelope days before. Not a long message. Not drama. Just confirmation, clean, professional, final. The estate transition was complete. The first tranche had been moved into a protected account. Security arrangements were active. Next steps were ready. Zainab's heart didn't jump with joy. It steadied. Something shifted in her, subtle but real, like a spine straightening inside a woman who had been bent for too long. She didn't suddenly become fearless. She was still a pregnant woman on a roadside. She still felt the sting of public humiliation. She still felt the ache of betrayal. But the shift was clarity, the kind that changes how you see everything. She realized that Tunde was performing because he believed power lived in volume. He believed humiliation was control. He believed that if he could make her look small, she would be small. Zainab understood something different. Real power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it records. Sometimes it waits until the other person finishes celebrating and then quietly removes the ground beneath them. She turned her phone slightly, not obvious, not dramatic, and pressed record. She captured the black car. She captured the cash in Tunde's hand. She captured Safina's smile. She captured the way Tunde's body language screamed victory. She captured the street, the people, the witnesses, the timing. She didn't do it for sympathy. She did it for evidence. Because there are some lies you can't argue with, but you can expose. Tunde laughed again, and the sound hit Zainab differently now. Not like a final sentence. More like a man walking deeper into a trap he couldn't see. Zainab's hand trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She didn't crawl. She simply stared at the scene in front of her and understood, with a cold calm that surprised even her, that this was not an argument. This was an execution of dignity. And in that same moment, she also understood something else. Executions draw crowds. Crowds draw attention. Attention draws consequences. So she gathered her breath, tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, and prepared to stand. Not just off the pavement, but out of the version of her life where silence meant suffering. Because what Tunde didn't know was that the street he chose for her humiliation was also the street where his confidence would begin to die, and the next step Zainab took would determine whether the story ended with pity or with power. Zainab didn't understand the full shape of her ruin on the roadside until her mind traveled backward to the first crack, because the street was only the loud betrayal, the one designed for witnesses. The real betrayal had happened quietly, the way the most dangerous things often happen, without shouting, without drama, with nothing but a notification and a number that rearranged the meaning of her marriage. She remembered the clinic hallway in Surulere like it was sealed inside her body. The smell of disinfectant. The faint echo of footsteps. The slow whir of a ceiling fan fighting Lagos heat without winning. The plastic chair that never felt comfortable, no matter how many pregnant women sat on it every day. She had been waiting for her scan, one hand on her belly, the other holding her phone loosely, not because she was bored, but because she had trained herself to stay alert. Pregnancy made you alert. Every ache, every movement, every doctor's word became something you held like fragile glass. The twins had been active that morning.
She remembered that too.
Two separate kicks at different angles, like tiny arguments about space. It had made her smile for a second, the soft private smile of a woman who had carried longing for years and was finally living inside answered prayers. She had been thinking about names, about hospital bags, about whether the nursery corner in their room needed more light. She had been thinking about the future like a mother thinks about it, carefully, fearfully, lovingly, as if planning could protect what you love. And then her phone buzzed. Not a call, not a message, a bank alert. At first it meant nothing. Zainab had received alerts before. Small transfers, airtime purchases,
Bills.
the normal noise of modern life. She glanced down absent-mindedly, expecting routine. But the words on the screen didn't behave like routine. They sat there with cold weight. Large withdrawal. Her thumb froze. She read it once, then again, and for a second her mind did what minds do when reality is too sharp. It tried to soften it. She blinked hard like that could change the numbers. She checked the amount and felt her throat tighten. Then she saw the next line. Balance 0. Zainab's first thought wasn't betrayal. It was error. System glitch. Fraud. Someone hacking accounts the way people always warned about. She told herself it had to be something technical, something external, something that could be fixed with a complaint and a reversal. She stood up slowly, ignoring the discomfort in her hips, and stepped away from the line of waiting women, because she suddenly needed air and privacy at the same time. She refreshed the app. The balance didn't change. She refreshed again, harder this time, like force could summon truth. Still 0. Her heartbeat grew loud in her ears, drowning out the clinic's sounds. The fan, the distant cough, the nurse calling names. Everything blurred into a single rushing noise, because Zainab wasn't looking at money. She was looking at the future she had been building, brick by brick, the way women build safety in a world that doesn't guarantee it. That account wasn't their joint spending account. It wasn't for weekend treats or emergencies or random family needs. It had always been separate, protected, sacred. The twins' college fund. The promise that their children would never beg for opportunity the way she once did. The fund she had started long before the pregnancy reached 8 months, long before she could even fully believe twins would come. She started it the way women start prayers, quietly, consistently, with faith that something good would eventually have a name. It began with small deposits. The kind most people wouldn't respect. The kind people mocked because they didn't look like wealth. Zainab had deposited after every small gain. She tucked money away after every sacrifice. She skipped new clothes and wore older ones longer. She reduced takeout. She stopped buying expensive hair products. She ignored some cravings. She cut corners in ways only disciplined women understand, because there is a certain kind of motherhood that begins before birth. The kind that says your comfort can wait because your child's future cannot. Whenever she added to it, she felt proud in a quiet way. Not the loud pride that needs applause. The private pride that feels like protection. And even when money was tight, she refused to touch it. She treated it like holy ground. When relatives needed help, she helped from somewhere else. When bills stretched them, she rearranged other things. The twins' fund was the one place she believed safety could live. It wasn't just money. It was her way of telling 2 unborn children, I will not let the world swallow you. Now it was gone. Zainab's fingers trembled as she clicked into transaction details. Her eyes moved quickly, desperate, searching for something that would prove her mind was exaggerating. She expected an unknown name, a strange account number, a fraud label. But the transfer reference didn't blink. It didn't apologize. It didn't hide. It carried Tunde's name. She stared at it so long her eyes began to sting, and for a moment, all she could feel was a deep, quiet disbelief. Not because she thought Tunde was perfect, but because stealing from your own unborn children required a special kind of emptiness. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't carelessness. It was decision. She felt her stomach tighten, not from pregnancy this time, but from shock. She leaned against the wall to steady herself. The twins kicked again, and for a second she wondered if they could feel what she was feeling, if fear traveled through blood the way love did. She pressed her palm against her belly and forced her breathing to slow, because she couldn't afford a breakdown in that hallway.
Not now.
not with her body already carrying so much. Her scan was called shortly after. She walked into the room like a woman holding two realities, the soft miracle of babies growing inside her, and the hard fact that the man who helped create them had just robbed them. The gel on her belly felt cold, and the doctor's voice was calm as the machine found movement, heartbeats, proof that life was continuing even while her world cracked. Zainab stared at the ceiling and nodded through instructions she barely absorbed, because her mind was still stuck on one question.
Why?
She didn't confront him immediately. Not because she wasn't angry, but because she needed certainty. Zainab had learned from life that accusations without proof become weapons used against you. She needed to walk into that conversation with facts so solid he couldn't twist them. She needed to be calm enough to watch his face closely. Calm enough to see what kind of man lived behind his words. Later that evening, when she got home, the house felt normal in the cruel way normal things feel when something inside you is changed. The television was on. The air conditioner hummed. Plates clinked faintly in the kitchen. Tunde moved around casually, like a man who hadn't just committed a quiet crime. That was the part that haunted her even before the street humiliation did.
His ease.
His comfort. His normalcy. Zainab didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She didn't collapse into tears the way people expect pregnant women to do. She sat down carefully, pulled up the transaction on her phone, and held it in front of her like a mirror. Tunde glanced at it and barely reacted at first. His eyes moved over the screen too quickly, like he didn't want to give it attention. Then his face shifted, small, controlled, a flicker of something that could have been irritation or calculation. He tried to look calm, but Zainab saw it. Women always see it. The microsecond where truth tries to surface and gets pushed back down by performance. He gave her a look that carried false concern, the kind men use when they've already decided your emotions are the problem. He acted like she was misunderstanding something too complicated for her. He made it sound temporary. He made it sound responsible. He made it sound like she should relax. He told her it was moved. He told her it was safe. He told her she should trust him. And that was when Zainab felt the second betrayal land, even heavier than the first. Because a man who steals can still panic. A man who steals can still show guilt. But a man who steals and then tells you to trust him has already started rewriting reality. He wasn't just taking money. He was taking authority over truth. He was asking her to surrender her instincts while he held the evidence of his betrayal in his own name. Zainab watched him carefully, letting him speak, letting him build his explanation like a wall. She noted the smoothness of it, the rehearsed tone, the way he didn't ask how she felt, the way he didn't mention the twins, the way he centered himself, his plans, his timing, his control. That night, Zainab lay in bed with one hand on her belly and the other holding her phone, staring at the empty balance like it was a hole in the future. She listened to Tunde's breathing beside her and felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest. It wasn't just anger. It was knowledge. The kind of knowledge that changes how you love someone. The kind that turns affection into caution. The kind that makes you realize the street humiliation was not random madness. It was the final scene of a decision that had started earlier, quietly, with a transfer and a man who believed the future belonged to him, not the babies he helped create. And as Zainab stared at the screen until her eyes grew heavy, she understood one thing with terrifying clarity. If he could erase their twins' college fund overnight without shame, then the next thing he could erase might not be money. It might be her. And she didn't yet know how far he was willing to go to make sure she stayed erased. 3 days before the street, before the laughter, before the suitcase and the cameras and the baby clothes on concrete, Zainab had stood alone in the living room holding an envelope she wasn't ready to open. It had arrived earlier that afternoon without drama, no raised voices at the gate, no urgent knocking. Just a courier with a neutral face, a clipboard, and a request for her signature. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and heavier than paper should feel, the kind of envelope that suggests permanence even before you read what's inside. She remembered turning it over in her hands, noticing the letterhead stamped neatly at the top. A Lagos law firm she didn't recognize. The name meant nothing to her, and yet something about it made her chest tighten. Zainab had learned long ago that life-changing news rarely announces itself with noise. It arrives quietly, disguised as routine, and waits for you to notice. She didn't open it immediately. She set it on the dining table and went to wash her hands, moving slowly the way 8 months of pregnancy required. The twins shifted inside her, restless, as if they sensed something different in the air. She drank water, sat down, stood up again. She tried to distract herself with small tasks, anything to delay the moment her life might change. The envelope watched her from the table like a patient observer. When she finally picked it up, she did so carefully, almost respectfully, as if tearing it open too quickly might release something she wasn't prepared to hold. She sat down, pressed her back against the chair, and broke the seal. The words inside were formal, polite, structured the way legal language always is when delivering truths that can crush or elevate in the same breath. It began with condolences. It spoke of death. Her estranged father, Chief Namdi, had passed away after a brief illness. Zainab read that line twice, feeling nothing at first, then a slow, distant ache she couldn't place. He had not been present in her life for years. He existed more as an absence than a memory, a name spoken rarely, carefully, like something fragile that could reopen wounds. She kept reading. The letter moved on quickly, efficiently, the way law firms do when emotion is not their responsibility. It explained that Chief Ease's estate had been reviewed, that his holdings were extensive, that he had left behind no competing claim, that after verification, Zainab had been identified as the sole legal beneficiary.
Sole.
The word landed heavier than the others. Then came the list. Shipping interests across ports she had never visited. Property holdings in locations she had only heard of in passing. A private investment trust structured so carefully it read like a fortress. Figures followed. Commas stacked upon commas. Zainab's eyes moved over them, without comprehension at first, like someone reading a foreign language. When understanding finally arrived, it arrived violently. $18 billion. She felt her breath leave her body all at once, not in excitement, but in shock. The room didn't spin. She didn't faint. She simply sat very still, her hands resting on the paper, her belly rising and falling slowly as her body tried to adjust to the scale of what she was reading. That number didn't feel real. It felt like something from headlines, from stories about people who lived far away from her life, from women who didn't wash their own clothes or count expenses in grocery stores. She was not that woman. Or, at least, she had never been. She read the letter again from the beginning, slower this time, as if repetition could anchor the words to reality. The firm explained the process, the steps taken, the confidentiality required. They requested a meeting. They advised discretion. They stressed security. They mentioned arrangements already in motion, protection structures, interim accounts, legal safeguards. Zainab placed the letter down gently, like it might break if she wasn't careful. She didn't scream. She didn't laugh. She didn't jump up and dance. She didn't even smile. Her eyes burned slightly, but no tears came. What she felt was not joy. It was weight. Heavy, quiet weight settling onto her shoulders. Wealth that large does not feel like freedom at first. It feels like responsibility multiplied by risk. It feels like exposure. Her first instinct was to call someone. Her mother. A friend. Anyone. Her fingers hovered over her phone, then stopped. She imagined voices on the other end of the line.
Shop.
Questions.
Advice.
Warnings. She imagined how quickly such news could escape the room and grow legs of its own. She imagined whispers. Expectations. Entitlement. People suddenly remembering her existence with urgency. She thought of Tunde. The thought came uninvited, sliding into her mind with uncomfortable clarity. She pictured his face if he knew, the way his posture might change, the way his tone would soften artificially, the way concern would suddenly appear where there had been impatience. She pictured how quickly love could transform into strategy when money entered the room. Zainab had lived long enough to understand one truth with painful precision. Money doesn't reveal character. It amplifies it. If Tunde was kind, he would become generous. If he was greedy, he would become dangerous. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Then she placed the envelope in her handbag, the one she kept close to her always now because pregnancy had made her protective of anything important. She sat there for a long time afterward, listening to the house around her, feeling the twins move, letting the reality settle, without rushing to name it. When Tunde came home later that evening, she said nothing. She watched him from the corner of her eye as he talked about his day, about traffic, about money, about plans. She noticed how easily the word money rolled off his tongue, how casually he spoke of expenses, how entitled he sounded when discussing future comforts. She noticed it all with new eyes. That night, after he fell asleep, Zainab lay awake staring at the ceiling, the envelope tucked safely in her bag beside the bed. She thought about her father, about absence, about inheritance, about how life sometimes returned things too late to heal old wounds, but just in time to expose new ones. She wondered whether Chief Ease had known this moment would come, whether his silence had been intentional or cowardly, whether this money was apology or legacy. But more than anything, she thought about timing. She could tell Tunde the next morning. She could place the letter in his hands and watch his reaction. She could let the inheritance change the dynamic of her marriage instantly, give her leverage, shift the power. The idea tempted her briefly. Then she imagined something else. She imagined silence. Not the silence of fear. The silence of observation. The kind of silence that lets people reveal themselves fully because they believe nothing is at stake. She imagined watching Tunde without the filter wealth would force him to wear. Watching how he treated her when he believed she had nothing. Watching how he treated the twins before money made them valuable to him. That thought stayed. Zainab had learned from her mother that real tests don't come when life is comfortable. They come when someone believes you are weak. She realized then that this inheritance was not just money. It was a mirror. And she needed to see what kind of man was standing in front of it. The next day, she met with the lawyers quietly.
No entouraje. No announcements.
She sat across from people who spoke in calm, measured tones about security, trusts, interim access, and timing. They advised patience. They explained risk. They outlined scenarios where disclosure could attract manipulation. Zainab listened carefully, asked questions, and made one request clear. Her name was not to be mentioned anywhere publicly. Not yet. The lawyers nodded, unsurprised. They had seen this before. People who understood that sudden wealth could be more dangerous than sudden poverty. They assured her the structures were strong, that her access would be controlled, that everything would be done discreetly. When she left that meeting, Zainab felt something close to calm for the first time since the bank alert. Not happiness. Not relief.
Calm.
Because she had chosen awareness over impulse. For the next 3 days, she lived as if nothing had changed. She cooked. She rested. She attended her clinic appointments. She spoke softly. She listened more than she talked. And in those 3 days, the truth about her marriage unfolded without resistance. Tunde grew more dismissive, more controlling, more careless. He moved money around freely. He made decisions without consulting her. He spoke about her pregnancy like it was a burden that needed managing, not a miracle that needed protecting. He talked about the future as if she was a temporary inconvenience in it. Zainab watched all of it with the envelope resting quietly in her bag, like a loaded truth she refused to fire too soon. By the time the 3rd day arrived, by the time the street humiliation followed the theft like a planned conclusion, Zainab was no longer confused. She was confirmed. The envelope hadn't changed everything because of what it contained. It had changed everything because it removed her last excuse to misunderstand the man she was married to. And as she sat on that pavement days later, sunlight burning into her skin, phone recording quietly in her hand, Zainab understood that appearing powerless had given her the clearest vision of all. Now she knew exactly who she was dealing with. And she knew exactly how careful she would have to be to survive what came next. Once the truth surfaced, the past rearranged itself with cruel precision. Moments that had once seemed small suddenly grew teeth. Conversations she had brushed aside replayed themselves in her mind, louder now, sharper, stripped of excuses she had wrapped around them. Zainab realized that nothing about what happened had been sudden. It had been staged slowly, quietly over time. It started with the finances. Tunde had framed it as care.
Concern.
He said pregnancy was stressful enough and that she didn't need the added pressure of managing money. He offered to help, his voice gentle, his hands reassuring as he suggested they centralize accounts. Zainab had hesitated at first, instinct pricking at her chest, but she ignored it. He was her husband, the father of her children. Trust, she told herself, was part of commitment. So she handed over access, telling herself it was partnership, not surrender. After that, saving became a joke to him. Whenever she mentioned putting money aside, especially for the twins, he laughed it off lightly. He called her too serious, said she worried too much about tomorrow instead of enjoying today. He told her children didn't need college funds yet, that life had a way of working itself out. Zainab remembered smiling through the discomfort, telling herself he was just trying to calm her fears. She didn't want to be the anxious wife. She wanted to be supportive. Then came the irritation. Subtle at first. A sigh when she asked questions. A sharp tone when she mentioned expenses. He began to act as if her concern for budgeting was an insult to his ability as a provider. Whenever she pushed back gently, he accused her of not trusting him. And, because she loved him, because she didn't want conflict in a house that was already changing with pregnancy, she backed down. The jokes followed. Little comments that landed wrong but were disguised as humor. He mocked people who planned too far ahead, calling them fearful, small-minded. He teased her about her village mentality when she insisted on caution. She laughed along, even when something inside her tightened. She told herself love meant understanding differences. She told herself she was overthinking. Then there was the cologne. Zainab remembered the first time she noticed it. It was unfamiliar, sharp and expensive, lingering long after he passed by. She had asked about it casually, forcing lightness into her voice. Tunde barely looked at her when he answered, saying he got it from a friend, that she was imagining things. He laughed, kissed her forehead, and made her feel silly for questioning something so trivial. She felt embarrassed for even asking. The late nights came next. Calls he took outside. Messages he shielded with his body. His phone suddenly face down on every surface. When she asked who he was talking to, he said work. When she asked why work suddenly required secrecy, he accused her of being insecure. He reminded her she was pregnant, emotional, sensitive. He told her stress wasn't good for the babies. Zainab swallowed her doubts because she didn't want to harm her children with conflict. And then there was the name. Safina. At first, it appeared casually. A colleague. A friend of a friend. Someone from networking events. Her name slipped into conversations too easily, too often. Zainab noticed how Tunde said it without thinking, how his tone changed slightly when he mentioned her. She noticed how he laughed harder at his phone sometimes, how his attention drifted elsewhere when he thought she wasn't looking. Still, she explained it away. Marriage, she told herself, wasn't a fairy tale. People had friends. People worked late.
People changed.
She reminded herself of the years they had built together, of the twins growing inside her, of the promise they had made. She believed that love, if handled carefully, could smooth over rough edges. She believed patience was strength. She believed endurance was proof of maturity. Now, sitting with the truth, Zainab saw how dangerous that belief had been. Every time her intuition spoke, she silenced it with logic designed to protect the marriage at the expense of herself. Every time discomfort rose, she called it insecurity instead of information. She had mistaken tolerance for wisdom. She had confused loyalty with self-erasure. The signs weren't hidden. They were simply inconvenient. She remembered the way Tunde's face hardened when she insisted on keeping records of the twins' savings. The way his charm slipped for half a second before returning when she mentioned future plans that didn't include him at the center. She remembered how quickly he grew defensive whenever she asked about money movement, how he dismissed her questions as nagging. She remembered Kudarat, the house help, watching him quietly. The way Kudarat's eyes followed Tunde when he moved around the house late at night. The way she lingered near doorways when he spoke on the phone. Zainab remembered the one time Kudarat hesitated before speaking, then softly advised her to check accounts herself. Zainab had nodded, distracted, trusting that marriage protected her more than vigilance ever could. She remembered believing that love alone was enough to correct disrespect. That belief almost cost her everything. As these memories lined up in her mind, Zainab felt no rage. Rage would have been easier. What she felt instead was grief. Grief for the woman she had been before trust became a liability. Grief for the safety she thought she had. Grief for the time she spent trying to fix something that was never broken accidentally. She understood now that Tunde hadn't changed suddenly. He had simply become more himself as access increased. Control disguised as care. Theft disguised as leadership. Betrayal disguised as ambition. The clarity was painful but necessary. Because in that clarity, Zainab also saw her own flaw. Not weakness. Not naivety. Something more subtle. She had believed that if she loved deeply enough, endured quietly enough, she could inspire respect. She believed commitment meant absorbing discomfort. She believed patience could outgrow betrayal. She was wrong. Love without boundaries had given Tunde unrestricted access to everything that mattered. Her body, her trust, her finances, her future. And once he had that access, he took what he wanted. Sitting with this realization, Zainab didn't sink into self-blame. She didn't shame herself for trusting. Trust, she realized, is not a mistake. The mistake is ignoring evidence when trust is violated. And now she had evidence. Evidence in the form of bank records. Evidence in the form of text patterns. Evidence in the form of behavior that no longer needed interpretation. Evidence in the form of a man who laughed at her humiliation while holding the money meant for their children's future. As the pieces clicked into place, Zainab felt something steady inside her replace the confusion. Resolve. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that sharpens. She understood now that the woman she needed to be moving forward was not the one who explained things away. She needed to become the woman who listened when her body warned her. When her intuition whispered. When patterns repeated. Tunde had underestimated one thing in his careful erosion of her life. He assumed that silence meant blindness. But silence had only been observation. And now that observation had turned into memory. Memory that would soon become action. Zainab placed a hand over her belly, feeling the twins shift, alive and steady despite everything. She promised them something quietly, without drama, without tears. No one would ever again have unrestricted access to what belonged to them. Not love, not marriage, not trust, and definitely not their future. Kudarat had always existed at the edges of the house. Not invisible, but quiet in the way people become when they understand that survival depends on not taking up too much space. She cleaned without making noise, cooked without announcing meals, and moved through rooms with a soft awareness of someone who knew every corner but never claimed any of them as hers. Zainab had noticed her, of course. You couldn't live with someone that long and not feel their presence. But it was the kind of presence you trust because it never asks for anything. Kudarat observed without comment. When voices rose, she lowered her head. When tension hung thick in the air, she worked a little faster, a little quieter. She never took sides openly. She never lingered to gossip. Zainab had once wondered if Kudarat even noticed the changes in the house, or if she simply floated above them, detached. Now she knew better. The call came while Zainab was still sitting on the pavement, her back aching against the curb, her phone warm in her hand from recording everything she could, without shaking too much. The laughter behind her was still loud, the humiliation still fresh. When she dialed Kudarat's number, she didn't expect an answer. Part of her already assumed Tunde had erased her from the house the same way he had erased Zainab. The phone rang once, then twice. Then Kudarat picked up. Her voice broke immediately. "Madam, he sent me away." There was no greeting.
No explanación.
Just the truth tumbling out raw and unprotected. Kudarat said she had arrived at the gate that morning only to find it locked. Her access revoked without warning. The security guard had been instructed not to let her in. She was told Zainab was no longer welcome in the house and that her own services were no longer needed. No notice, no pay, no chance to retrieve personal items she had left behind. Zainab closed her eyes briefly, absorbing that familiar cruelty. The pattern was clear now. Remove witnesses. Remove voices. Remove anyone who might complicate the narrative. She asked one question, her voice low and steady despite everything. "Did you see anything?" There was a pause on the line. Long enough for Zainab to wonder if Kudarat would retreat into fear. Long enough to hear traffic and distant voices and her own heartbeat. When Kudarat spoke again, her words came slower, heavier. She said she had noticed things for weeks. Documents printed late at night when the house was quiet. Tunde pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed tones that stopped the moment anyone walked past. Files stacked on the dining table and hurriedly shoved away. Conversations that didn't include names but carried urgency. Words like "move fast" and "before she knows." Kudarat admitted she hadn't understood everything at first. She was not educated in finance. She didn't know the details of bank processes or asset transfers. But she knew when something wasn't right. She knew when a man who once ignored paperwork suddenly treated documents like weapons. Zainab leaned forward slightly, her hand still protectively on her belly, her body responding to the weight of what she was hearing. Kudarat's voice dropped even lower when she said the next part. She had overheard Tunde talking to a woman. Not on speaker, not clearly, but enough. Enough to recognize Safina's name. Enough to hear laughter that didn't belong in secret conversations. Enough to hear frustration when Zainab's name came up. And then there was the sentence. Kudarat hesitated before repeating it, as if saying it out loud might give it power. "Once she's gone, the money will be free." Zainab felt something inside her shift violently, like a lock clicking open. Not shock. Not surprise. Understanding. This wasn't abandonment. It was strategy. Tunde hadn't left because the marriage failed. He hadn't acted impulsively. He had executed a plan designed to isolate her, discredit her, and remove anyone who might contradict his story. The humiliation on the street was not an emotional outburst. It was a message.
To her.
To witnesses. To anyone watching. "This is what happens when you challenge me." Zainab's chest tightened as she pieced it together. The stolen college fund. The sudden eviction. The mistress standing beside him like a prize. The removal of Kudarat. The timing. None of it was random. It was coordinated. If Zainab had walked away quietly, ashamed and broken, Tunde would have controlled the narrative completely. He would have painted her as unstable, irresponsible, difficult. He would have moved assets quickly, sold what he could, and disappeared into a new life with stolen money and a story that made him the victim. And she almost let it happen. The thought sent a cold wave through her body. Not fear. Gratitude. Gratitude that she had stopped long enough to call the one person who had been watching when everyone else was too busy assuming. Kudarat apologized over the phone, her voice thick with guilt. She said she should have spoken sooner. She said she was afraid. Afraid of losing her job. Afraid of being accused. Afraid of a powerful man who had already shown he had no problem erasing people. Zainab listened quietly, then spoke with a firmness that surprised them both.
"You did speak.
And you did exactly what you could." Kudarat's sob broke loose then, sharp and quiet. Zainab realized in that moment that betrayal doesn't only wound the person it targets. It creates collateral damage. Fear spreads. Silence grows. People learn to survive by shrinking. But survival is not the same as safety. As the call ended, Zainab sat there on the roadside with a new clarity that cut through the pain. She wasn't dealing with a man who had lost control. She was dealing with a man who believed he was entitled to everything within reach. And entitlement, once threatened, becomes dangerous. Zainab looked around at the street again. The neighbors, the phones, the open gate behind Tunde, the performance he thought he had perfected. She understood now that what she held in her hands was not just proof of cruelty. It was proof of intent. Intent changes everything. She stood up slowly, her body heavy but steady, and lifted her suitcase. She did not argue. She did not plead. She did not announce what she knew. She walked away from the scene while Tunde laughed behind her, unaware that the quiet woman he thought he had erased was now holding the full outline of his plan. As she walked, Zainab made a decision. She would not go to the police yet. Not without strategy. Not without control. She knew too well how easily stories could be twisted, how quickly a pregnant woman could be dismissed if she arrived without preparation. Instead, she would gather. She would document. She would protect the one person who had spoken up. She would ensure Kudarat was safe. And then, when the time was right, she would let the truth speak where her voice might be ignored. By the time she reached the end of the street, the humiliation no longer sat on her shoulders the same way. It was still there, still heavy, but it no longer defined her. What defined her now was knowledge. And knowledge, she understood, was the one thing Tunde could not steal back. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and urgency, the kind of place where emotions were kept on a tight leash because too many lives depended on calm. Zainab noticed it immediately as she was helped onto the narrow bed, the white sheets crisp beneath her back, the ceiling lights too bright for someone who had spent the last hour under open sky and public shame. Her body felt heavy in a way that went beyond pregnancy, as if every decision she had postponed was now pressing down on her chest at once. The nurse spoke gently, asking routine questions, checking vitals, adjusting machines. Zainab answered automatically, her mind still half on the street she had just left, half on the quiet promise she had made to herself not to break down where it could cost her something she could never replace. When the doctor entered, his expression was professional but not detached. He glanced at her chart, then at her face, and Zainab understood before he spoke that something mattered here. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He explained things the way doctors do when they don't want panic, but can't afford denial. Her blood pressure was elevated. Her stress levels were not helping. With twins at 8 months, her body was already working hard. Sustained emotional shock could trigger early labor. Complications. Risks that didn't need to exist. The words early labor landed hard. Zainab stared at the ceiling while he spoke, nodding slowly, absorbing each sentence like a fact she could store and act on. Panic hovered at the edges of her thoughts, but she didn't let it in. Panic wasted energy. Panic blurred judgment. She had learned that much already. When the doctor left the room, the hum of machines filled the space. Then came the sound she hadn't realized she needed until it reached her ears. 2 heartbeats. Steady. Rhythmic. Alive. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back, focusing instead on the sound. It anchored her, reminded her what was real. Whatever game Tunde thought he was playing, whatever humiliation he believed would reduce her to silence, this was the truth he couldn't rewrite. There were 2 lives inside her that depended entirely on her ability to remain steady. This wasn't just her fight anymore. For the first time since everything unraveled, fear arrived cleanly, without chaos. Not fear of gossip. Not fear of abandonment. Fear of losing control of her body. Fear of something happening before she was ready. Fear that hesitation could cost her more than dignity. She placed both hands on her belly, breathing slowly, deliberately, counting the seconds the way the nurse had taught her months ago. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Again. The twins shifted gently, and Zainab felt something settle inside her that she hadn't felt since the envelope arrived. Resolve. She understood now that survival didn't look like confrontation. It looked like restraint. It looked like knowing when to pause and when to act. It looked like discipline, the same discipline she had used to build the fund Tunde thought he could erase, without consequence. The doctor returned with instructions.
Rest.
Reduce stress. Monitoring. She agreed to everything without argument. There was no ego in this room.
No pride.
Only priorities. As she was wheeled into a quieter recovery area, Zainab's phone buzzed softly in her hand. Messages she didn't open. Missed calls she ignored. The world outside was already moving faster than she was prepared to meet. She turned the phone face down. Not yet. In that quiet space, surrounded by white walls and muted footsteps, Zainab made a decision that changed her posture in the world.
She would not panic.
She would not rush to expose everything she knew. She would not allow urgency to force mistakes. She would protect her body first. She would protect her children without compromise. And she would protect her future with strategy, not emotion. When the security men arranged by her lawyers arrived later, respectful and unobtrusive, addressing her carefully, Zainab felt the shift again. Grief still existed. Betrayal still burned. But helplessness was gone. Replaced by structure. By planning. By an understanding that power did not need to be loud to be absolute. As she closed her eyes and listened once more to the steady rhythm of two hearts beating in time, Zainab knew something with certainty. Whatever came next would be handled on her terms. Not in the street. Not in panic. But in control. Barrister Iridi Balagan didn't flinch. Zainab noticed it immediately. The absence of shock, the lack of pity, the calm way the woman across the table adjusted her glasses and reached for a pen. No sharp inhale when Zainab described the street. No muttered disbelief when she mentioned the stolen fund. No dramatic pauses meant to signal sympathy. Iridi listened the way surgeons listen before an operation. Quietly, completely, already mapping the work ahead. The office was cool and orderly, shelves lined with files that looked heavy with other people's endings and beginnings. Zainab sat upright despite the fatigue in her bones, her hands folded protectively over her belly. She spoke slowly, carefully, laying out the story exactly as it had happened. Not the emotions first. The facts. The timeline. The moments that mattered. When she finished, the silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was deliberate. Iridi finally spoke, her voice even.
She didn't ask Zainab how she felt.
She asked for evidence. Bank logs. Transaction timestamps. Account access records. Messages. Call histories. Any video footage. Names of witnesses. Dates when control over finances changed. The moment Zainab realized the fund was gone. The exact wording Tunde used when confronted. The presence of a mistress. The eviction. The pregnancy timeline. Each question landed like a brick placed carefully into a foundation. Zainab answered all of them. When she handed over her phone, the video from the street queued up silently. Iridi watched without comment. She didn't look away. She didn't shake her head. She watched until the end, then nodded once, as if confirming something she already suspected. This is not just marital misconduct, she said calmly. This is financial theft involving unborn minors. The word minors shifted the air in the room. Iridi explained it without drama. Money set aside for children, especially documented education funds, was not treated casually under the law. Removing it without consent wasn't a misunderstanding. It was misappropriation. And when paired with abandonment during pregnancy, it carried weight. Serious weight. Zainab felt her spine straighten slightly. Iridi continued. Abandonment during late-stage pregnancy wasn't just cruel. It altered legal assumptions. It affected custody considerations. It reframed intent. Courts paid attention to patterns, and this pattern was clear. Then she addressed the inheritance. Zainab braced herself, expecting caution, maybe concern. Instead, Iridi's eyes sharpened with focus. She explained trusts, structures, firewalls. How estates of that size were rarely left exposed if handled correctly. How silence in this case had been wise. How disclosure too early could invite manipulation, coercion, or worse.
Your husband has no claim to that estate as things stand, she said.
Especially not after this behavior. Zainab exhaled slowly. For the first time since the street, someone spoke about her future as something solid. Not fragile. Not dependent on mercy. Something that could be secured, protected, defended. Iridi outlined the plan methodically. Immediate steps. Account freezes where possible. Formal notices. Documentation preservation. Sworn statements from witnesses. Protective arrangements for Kudarat. Medical records documenting stress risk during pregnancy. Everything logged. Everything timed. There was no talk of revenge. There was talk of insulation. Protection. Containment. Control. Zainab realized then that true power didn't look like public humiliation returned in kind. It looked like doors closing quietly around someone who thought they were free. It looked like options disappearing one by one. It looked like consequences arriving without noise. Iridi leaned back slightly, finally meeting Zainab's eyes directly. You don't need to destroy him publicly, she said. The law will do that on its own if he keeps moving the way he is. Something unfamiliar settled in Zainab's chest. Not relief. Not joy. Control. She wasn't reacting anymore. She was positioning. As the meeting ended, Iridi gathered the files neatly, already assigning tasks to her team. Zainab stood slowly, steady on her feet, aware of her body, aware of the twins shifting inside her. Outside the office, the city moved on as usual.
Cars.
Voices.
Noise.
But Zainab felt different moving through it now. Less exposed. Less breakable. She had walked into that office carrying a story of loss. She walked out carrying a strategy. And that made all the difference. If this part made you pause, if you've ever watched someone mistake patience for weakness or silence for surrender, stay with the story. Like this video so it reaches more people who need to see how quiet strength really works. Subscribe and turn on notifications because what comes next is where protection turns into pressure, and not everyone is ready for that. And tell me in the comments, do you think justice should be loud or inevitable? They started celebrating almost immediately. Tunde didn't announce anything outright. He was too careful for that. Instead, he posted the kind of captions that pretended to be about growth while quietly rewriting history. Words like peace at last. Freedom feels good. New chapter. He framed it as healing, as if walking away from a pregnant wife was self-care. As if humiliation was a boundary he had finally learned to set. Zainab saw the posts without reacting. She didn't comment. She didn't block him. She simply observed. Then Safina appeared. At first, she hovered at the edges of the photos, an arm here, a reflection there. Then she stepped fully into frame, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed she had arrived at the finish line. Tight dresses. Soft lighting. Carefully angled shots that suggested intimacy, without naming it. The message was clear enough for anyone paying attention. They were no longer hiding. Friends began to whisper. Church acquaintances sent cautious messages that pretended to check in but really wanted confirmation. Family members called with carefully neutral voices, trying to understand how things had gotten so bad. Gossip bloomed the way it always does when silence leaves space for imagination. Zainab said nothing. She stayed quiet not because she was overwhelmed, but because she understood something they didn't. Silence doesn't stop people from talking. It makes them careless. When no one is contradicting them, they start filling in details themselves. They exaggerate. They confess. They document their own lies without realizing it. Every caption became a timestamp. Every photo confirmed proximity. Every celebration clarified sequence. While Tunde posed like a man reborn, his accounts were being watched. Not frozen yet. Just observed. Movement tracked. Transfers noted. Patterns established. While Safina posted about new beginnings, messages she had sent weeks earlier were being archived, cross-referenced, aligned with bank logs and phone records. Zainab didn't rush to correct the narrative. She let it mature. She let them enjoy the illusion of safety. At night, when the city settled and the twins moved gently inside her, Zainab reviewed updates from Iridi's office. Short messages.
No emotion.
Progress markers. Documentation complete. Statements notarized. Medical reports filed. Kuterat relocated quietly and safely. Everything proceeding on schedule. The contrast was almost surreal. On one screen, laughter and champagne glasses and captions about happiness. On the other, spreadsheets, timelines, legal language. One was noise. The other was consequence. Zainab watched it all, without flinching. She understood now that people reveal the most when they believe they are untouchable. When they think the story has ended in their favor. When they mistake silence for defeat. They start talking loosely, posting recklessly, confirming what they would otherwise deny.
Tunde did exactly that.
He told friends half-truths that contradicted each other. He slipped details he couldn't keep straight. He complained about stress while boasting about freedom. He referenced money he shouldn't have mentioned. Each word made sense to him in isolation. On paper, they formed a pattern he couldn't escape. Safina was even worse. She posted joy without caution, mocked subtly without naming names, liked comments that crossed lines, shared quotes about women who win. She believed the spotlight meant safety. She believed visibility meant power. Zainab let her believe it, because the louder they became, the clearer everything looked when arranged by someone who knew how to read behavior instead of captions. There was a moment, scrolling late one evening, when Zainab paused on a photo of them together. Tunde smiling too hard. Safina leaning in too comfortably. A caption about destiny. Zainab didn't feel anger. She felt confirmation. She placed the phone face down, rested her hands over her belly, and breathed slowly until the twins settled again. She wasn't racing them. She wasn't competing for public sympathy. She wasn't trying to reclaim anything they thought they had taken. She was letting them finish writing their own case. When the time came, there would be no shouting. No dramatic reveal on social media. No need to convince anyone of anything. The truth would arrive fully formed. And by then, their celebration would already be evidence. The moment power changed hands did not arrive with noise. There was no dramatic phone call. No raised voices. No confrontation in a parking lot or public space. It came quietly, the way real shifts always do, carried on paper and process rather than emotion. One morning, while Tunde was still enjoying the comfort of believing he had outrun consequences, documents began moving through systems he no longer controlled. Court filings were submitted before he woke up. By the time he poured his first cup of coffee, his name was already sitting inside legal language that did not care about charm, excuses, or reinvention. It cared about timelines, numbers, intent. The first sign was subtle. A transaction that didn't go through. A transfer delayed without explanation. Tunde frowned, refreshed his app, told himself it was a network issue. He had lived long enough believing obstacles were temporary things meant to test patience, not authority. He tried again. Same result. When the call from the bank finally came, it wasn't urgent. It was polite. Certain accounts had been restricted, pending review. Pending review was the kind of phrase that sounded harmless until you understood what it meant. It meant eyes where there hadn't been eyes before. Questions where there used to be assumptions. It meant movement had been noticed. Tunde laughed it off at first. He told Safina it was nothing. A misunderstanding. He made a joke about how banks loved paperwork. Safina smiled, but something in her eyes tightened. She had not built her confidence on patience. She had built it on momentum. By the afternoon, the laughter was gone. Emails arrived. Formal, unemotional. Requests for clarification. Notices of injunction. References to funds earmarked for minors. Language that stripped the story of emotion and rebuilt it as fact. The phrase misappropriation involving unborn children appeared more than once. That was when confusion replaced confidence. Tunde sat very still as he read, his mind racing through explanations that no longer fit together. He told himself this had to be about the divorce. About jealousy. About spite. He told himself Zainab was reacting emotionally, that she would calm down, that this could be talked through. But the documents didn't argue. They didn't insult him. They simply stated what had happened.
Dates, amounts,
Transfers, video corroboration, witness statements, medical records confirming late-stage pregnancy stress. Everything laid out cleanly, without drama. When he tried to call Zainab, the call did not go through. When he tried to message her, the message remained unread. For the first time since the street, he felt something he hadn't anticipated. Not anger.
fear.
Safina panicked openly.
She paced.
She demanded explanations. She asked questions too quickly, too loudly, the way people do when they realize they were not holding all the information they thought they were. She started talking about lawyers, about connections, about who she could call. But even as she spoke, more notices arrived. Her name appeared where she didn't want it to. Messages she had once sent casually now sat inside sworn documents. Voice notes she had laughed through were transcribed word for word. The timing of her involvement became undeniable. The idea that she was just a bystander collapsed under the weight of evidence she had helped create. Excuses surfaced too late. Tunde said he had meant to return the money. Safina said she hadn't known it was for the twins. Both statements were already contradicted by timestamps, messages, and behavior. There was no room left to negotiate reality. Zainab watched none of this unfold in real time. She sat in a quiet room with filtered light, her body supported, her breathing steady. One hand rested on her belly the way it always did now, not out of fear, but grounding. The twins moved gently, unaware of the shift happening around them, unaware that something fundamental had changed in the world they were about to enter. When Barrister Iridi updated her, the tone was calm. Orders granted. Accounts frozen. Inheritance confirmed and sealed. Protective measures in place. Zainab nodded slowly, absorbing each sentence without reaction. There was no rush of triumph. No urge to call anyone. No desire to announce anything. She had not done this to win. She had done this to end something. Later, when she finally stood across from Tunde again in a controlled, neutral space, she saw the difference immediately. The man who once laughed on a street corner now avoided her eyes. His shoulders were tense. His words stumbled over themselves, searching for sympathy that had already expired. Zainab didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She didn't ask for fairness. She enforced it. She listened while he spoke, while he tried to soften his actions with intention and confusion and regret that arrived only after consequence. When he finished, she spoke once, quietly. This was never about punishment. It was about protection. She gestured slightly, not to the room, not to the documents, but to her body, to the life growing there. I will not allow my children to learn survival from the same man who taught betrayal. That was all. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat.
She didn't need to.
Power had already moved. Not from loud to louder. From reckless to precise. From entitlement to accountability. As she walked away, steady and unhurried, Zainab understood something clearly. The real victory wasn't the money. It was control. Control over her body. Control over her children's future. Control over a narrative that would no longer be shaped by cruelty or performance. And for the first time since the envelope arrived, since the street, since the betrayal revealed itself in layers, Zainab felt something settle deep inside her. Not relief. Completion. Because some endings don't need celebration. They just need to be final.